There hasn't been haven't been too many changes since since 2024, but I'll just recap those, and without going into a lot of detail, I'll just point out if it's a change that impacts you, then um, um, we can talk about that specifically, offline afterwards. All right, so we'll get going this morning. So here are the changes that came into effect in 2024. There are some new reporting requirements, but it really only impacts companies that have more than 100 employees and if they are on a high hazard list. Now, I can't say that I'm absolutely certain that these changes came into effect with the new administration. But they were supposed to have come into effect where employers with 100 or more and on the high hazard list had to then electronically report their 301 information as well as the 300. But again, if that doesn't impact anyone here, then it's not an issue. The high hazard list is a separate appendix. There are two appendices in that reference that I'm showing there, the 1904. But if you are typical construction or warehouse, manufacturing, trucking, nothing has changed for those employers at this point. All right, so the general purpose, the original purpose for this record keeping standard was for employers to document work-related fatalities, injuries, and illnesses. And again, it's just a document, and there are also reporting and recording requirements. Those are two separate tasks under this OSHA standard that we will cover as we go through. There are some exemptions. So there are, depending on the type of activity that the company does, there may be some exemptions there in the number of employees. But if you fall under one of those exemptions, 10 or fewer employees or in an industry that doesn't require record keeping, but nonetheless, if you have a fatality or an amputation, loss of an eye or inpatient hospitalization, you still are required to report to OSHA. If you are requested for an injury and illness survey and OSHA sends out letters sometimes asking for that information, you're not exempt from that. Or if the Bureau of Labor Statistics sends out a survey asking for injury data, you're not exempt from that. You still have to participate in those. But the partial exemption, meaning not having to retain OSHA 300 logs at all if your company has 10 or fewer employees at all times during the last calendar year. So if you are a smaller operator and seasonal, your average employees over the 2,000 hours per employee per year, if you're not meeting that 2,000 hours per year or 20,000, I guess it would be 22,000, more than 10, then you would not be required under the size exemption. It does include if you hire temps, and even though they're not your employee, they're employed by the temp agency, and if they're injured, their work comp goes on the temp agency's work comp. But because you're supervising and directing those employees, if they get injured, they actually go on your 300 log and count as an employee. It's one of the quirks of this 1904 standard. Okay, so as we get into now some of the details about recordability, what constitutes a recordable injury, we have first aids, which are generally you keep track of the first aid on the 301 log. And this is a non-mandatory log because if you use a C2 form or some other method of keeping a record of an injury that falls into the first aid category, and we do that in case somewhere down the road it becomes a medical aid because of an infection or something like that, then we might file a C2, or it may then trigger a recordable. But these injuries are considered non-recordable first aids. So if I get a cut and I apply a bandage Band-Aid or butterfly bandage or a steri strip, something like that, that's going to be non-recordable as far as OSHA is concerned. You may want to keep a record of first aid, but it's not a recordable injury that goes on the 300 log. Same with using non-prescription medication at non-prescription strength. So if I take Advil because of a strain, the dose on the bottle says 200 milligram tablets, not to exceed whatever it is, 6 per day. And if I do that because I had a strain, but I didn't lose any time, I didn't see a doctor, that's a first aid injury and that's not recordable. If I get a tetanus shot because I stepped on a nail or I got poked by a piece of wire, that's a preventative thing, not a recordable injury. If I get a wound and I have to have it cleaned or soaked, that's preventative again, not recordable, but it is first aid. Hot and cold therapy, any like finger splint or a wrap or something like that that is non-rigid, those are for prevention. Those are considered first aid treatments. Using a temporary mobilization device is also preventative in the sense that if somebody falls off a ladder, you don't want that person to move, and you call EMS and they're going to come in and they're going to immobilize that person until they get them x-rayed and check them over for any injury. Just because all of that happened doesn't make it a recordable injury. All of that is done on a preventative basis. If nothing comes out of it, then it's first aid non-recordable. If I drill a fingernail, non-recordable. An eye patch, if there's some cream on there in your eye, non-recordable. Removing a foreign body from the eye, if I swab it or flush it, that's non-recordable. If it's embedded and I need to have it extracted, that's a medical procedure that will be recordable. Removing a splinter, again, same sort of thing, non-recordable. Finger guards, massage, fluid for heat stroke or heat illness. Those are non-recordables. So these two terms are often used interchangeably, and they mean different things from an OSHA standpoint. So a recordable injury is the word that OSHA uses to have the injury documented on the OSHA 300 log. A reportable injury applies to fatality, loss of an eye, amputation, and hospitalization where the worker is admitted. Those four things are reportable to OSHA, usually by telephone within a specified time. Fatality is 8 hours. The other 3 are within 24 hours. So other than those four things, and those reportables may also be recordable, but not all recordables are reportable. If you follow, that's why it becomes interchange, because people think it's the same thing, but it's not. Neither word dictates what you report to your insurance company. In other words, if you have a recordable injury because well, it fits the parameters, you may or may not have to assert a claim within the insurance side of workers' comp. You can still have a recordable, but not necessarily file a claim. So we'll cover those parameters of each of those incidents as we go through. So not all injuries are created equal. In other words, what's recordable under OSHA doesn't necessarily mean that it's compensable or vice versa. So let's say somebody gets injured at work. They go to a walk-in clinic because they have a shoulder strain, and they get diagnosed with a strain, and they maybe get some muscle relaxers, and they're sent home for that day, and they can go back to work the next day on some sort of restricted capacity. Are they being compensated for their time? Well, the day of the injury, they get paid in full regardless of how long they work, according to the standards. that's not a compensable injury. Even if they take 2 or 3 days off because of the injury, they're not triggering compensability until they hit 7 days away from work due to a work-related injury. Um, so now, is it recordable? Well, it could be recordable if they got a prescription. It's going to be recordable if they miss the day, at least one day following the day of the injury. And this is a key bit of information here. If it happens on a Friday and the worker is told that they can return to work on Monday, that means Saturday and Sunday are going to be 2 days of lost work time. And that's a recordable 2 day lost time, even though you don't work on those days. So ideally, if someone gets hurt on Friday and they can return to work on Monday, even though they're not going to come back on Friday, you want the medical to say the worker is released to work to come back on Friday on the same day. You're going to save yourself 2 days of lost time recordability. All right, so the recording criteria, what are we going to document? How do we determine what we document? So employers, and for our discussion today, we're all covered employers because we have more than 10 employees, let's say. So every work-related fatality, injury, or illness that is work-related and is a new case, and it meets these additional requirements that we're going to cover, then it can be deemed a recordable injury. So we're going to look at that process, and there's 5 steps to determining if it's work-related, if it's a new case, etc., and if we get it recorded. So keep in mind that any licensed healthcare professional can put an employee out of work or recommend or prescribe restricted duty. So if they go in and they're authorized off work for X number of days, we don't count the day of the injury or the day of the onset of illness as day one of that we have to record on the 300 log for days away or restricted days. We do not count the day of the injury. So we count all lost work days, job transfers, and restricted work activity, including weekends and holidays, from the day following the day of the injury. So like I said, we're going to count every weekend, Christmas Day, New Year's, any day, holidays, weekends, doesn't matter. We cap the total number of days at 180 days. That's just a requirement of this standard. We're not going, if somebody gets hurt on January 2nd and they never come back, we don't put in 363 days. We cap it at 180. So we stop counting if we find out that the employee leaves company employment voluntarily. Say they're off work. Let's say your work dwindles at a certain time of year and there's no position for this worker to come back to. They go through their medical, they're ready to go back to work, but they're not going to be coming back to you, and they go to work for somebody else, or they leave the region and go somewhere else where they can't come back and work for you. Those are conditions where we would stop counting. Now, how do we know all these things? If someone is working, if someone has filed a workers' comp claim and they're getting compensated for that, this is where we work with the claims adjuster to determine, when did they stop getting paid compensation because they have not responded, have not continued their follow-up appointments, etc., or they move to another jurisdiction and they're no longer seeking treatment related to that claim. So that's where we would, if we don't know, then we would work with our claims people to determine that number. And then we record only once, even if so somebody gets hurt December 15th and they don't come back until the end of January of the next year, all of those days, say the 31 days of January, we would load up in December and count those days as 40 or 50 days or whatever it was that from whatever day they missed started missing work in December. We would add the January dates to that, and in the following year, if it didn't happen that year, it doesn't go on that calendar year 300 log. All right, so did the employee experience an injury or illness? So that's the first question. Did it happen? So what OSHA says, as an injury or illness is an abnormal condition or disorder. Injuries include cases such as, but not limited to, cut, fracture, sprain, amputation, and then illnesses, acute and chronic. And I'm going to talk about chronic illness in a little while. But if I have if I have eczema and then it flares up because of a work-related condition, and it causes me to see a doctor and get prescription, and because of my work exposure, that may be work-related. As I said, we'll talk about that in a minute. But okay, did it happen? Did I have an injury or illness? Question one. Question two is it work-related? So then how do we determine that? So we look at things that may have happened in the work environment. An event or exposure in the work environment is a discernible cause of the injury or illness. So if it is presumed to be work-related, if it happens, in the work environment. And I'll give you a case. It was a non-construction case where it was a manufacturing facility. The company had made a break area outside of the building for people who wanted to go outside and have a cigarette. And so they had a pathway and a gazebo, etc. So this person was on their break, and instead of being in the lunchroom or the coffee room, whatever, having something there or in their vehicle, they went out to this company provided gazebo. And instead of using a walkway, they went down a hill, slipped, fell, injured themselves. That was considered work-related because the event or exposure was in the work environment, and that was a discernible cause of the injury. Even though it was on break and they were doing something, they wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for their need to be at work. So that was considered a work-related injury and therefore recordable. So is it work-related? Then, so it's not only the physical locations, but also the equipment or materials used by the employees during the course of their work. So there are some parameters that we have to explore to determine work-relatedness. If it's a significant aggravation, so say that someone had an injury from a ladder fall, and they hurt their shoulder, and they're not bad. They come back to work and they're working, doing some PT, etc. Everything's fine, and then they lift something and cause that injury to flare up again. If that aggravation constitutes, well, a fatality or loss of consciousness or further days away or restricted days or job transfer or additional medical treatment, then it would then be recordable. The pre-existing injury or illness. So another example is if I have asthma, I was born with that. I have it under control. I use a inhaler, and now I'm exposed to something at work that aggravates my condition, and it causes me to have some sort of reaction like an anaphylactic shock, and no one's around to help me, and I die on the job site. That's going to be a significant aggravation of a pre-existing condition, and it's going to be a recordable injury and a reportable injury because it's a fatality that happened in the workplace. Now, we don't know for sure why that it happened. We would still need to call OSHA within 8 hours because it happened in the workplace. And then through the medical examiner or the determination cause of death, if they find that it was something in the workplace that triggered the fatality, then it's going to be a recordable fatality in that case. So there are some exceptions. If you have a gym at your workplace, or basketball court outside, or you're at a company picnic and you're playing baseball, or some activity and you're injured, those are not recordable, even though it's a company event. It's on private time. So those types of injuries are not going to be recordable. If I'm sitting at my desk having lunch and I choke on a sandwich and collapse at my desk and nobody else is around and, I don't survive, that's not a work-related fatality because I'm having uh, food or drink or something that I personally prepared and I'm having at my desk. That's not arising out of the course of employment. Personal tasks outside of work hours. So if I'm working my normal day and part of my day, my task is to go make a delivery to a job site, and I do that. But before I come back to the office, I go to the coffee shop and I slip on the sidewalk and fall down and break my wrist or my elbow. Is that work related? No, because I took a personal jog outside of my assigned working hours or outside of my assigned task. So there are some variations on what's recordable, what isn't. So if we have any of these types of injuries that you're not sure of what to record, and then ultimately, if you have 20 or more employees, we're going to be reporting those electronically to OSHA. We want to verify that everything that I have on my list is actually something that needs to be recorded. The other reason I say you only want to put in what you absolutely have to. A lot of companies over-report. Somebody goes in, because they go to a clinic, they have a medical treatment, and there's a bill that they pay, or the carrier pays. That doesn't necessarily make it a recordable injury, but you put it on your log. And if you're a type of employer that has to then bid work, and part of that bid package is to show your 300 logs. They may see that you have a lot of injuries that you're documenting, and that may be something that is a red flag to a hiring entity, to an owner, or to a general contractor, let's say. So you only want to record what you absolutely have to. Travel status, if somebody's on travel status, they're working out of town, and an injury occurs while they're on travel status. If that is work related, then it's going to be recordable. If they're, again, after work, they go to the bar and then have an injury or something afterwards, going back to their home away from home at a hotel or B&B, that is a personal detour, essentially, that is solely responsible for that injury. It's not work related in any way, be recordable. But workers that are out of town engaged in work, we still have to look at those types of injuries more closely to see if they are in fact work related. So as you can see here, if they're home away from home, if they're at a fixed work site, if they occur between commuting from the hotel, let's say, or the temporary residence and the job location, it's not going to be recordable. Even if they're in a company vehicle, it's only going to apply. So that's no different than if they were coming from their permanent residence to a job site. That transition is not recordable. If they're in a motor vehicle accident or some other way that they're injured, it would only apply then to the actual job site. If you have employees that work from home, and that's exactly what I'm doing today. So if something happened, say I had to distribute, or I received boxes of material from Oryx and they were delivered to my house, and I had to lift them and move them and break them down and then, send them out or bring them somewhere. I mean, that's going to be, if that's part of my normal task, just because I'm doing it at home, it's still work related. But if I'm picking up one of those boxes and I trip on a rug that's worn or not secured properly, and I trip and fall and get injured, well, that's my fault. That's not work related because I'm at home, even though I'm carrying a work related box. The condition in that environment is a factor that is not contributing to the work relatedness. So there are some give and take that we have to examine. All right, so far we've determined that there was an injury or an illness, and that it is work related. So now we have to figure out, is this a new case as opposed to a reaggravation of an existing case? So if it's a new case, that means that the employee has not previously experienced a recorded injury or illness of the same type at the same part of the body, or the employee previously experienced a recorded injury, same body part, same place, but they recovered completely. So they got a doctor's clear that they can return to work full duty, that their neck strain had resolved. And 4 months later, they do something where they re-injure that same body part. That is going to be considered a new case. So you may have two entries in that same year for the same worker for the same injury. Now, there's some gray around that as well. Say I get a doctor's note, I'm recovered, I go back to work, and a few days later, I re-injure the same part because a doctor cleared me to go back work full duty. Well, the doctor's clearing that person to go back to work to full duty is going to be based on an interview with that patient to say, how do you feel? Do you think you can do that? Yeah. The person goes back to work. They re-injure the same part. Now it's going to be, it's a subjective determination that you were fit for full duty. And it's more likely going to not be a new case from a recordability standpoint, and probably not from a compensable standpoint if they've already been off and receiving benefits. It may just restart any benefits if they're taking time off. So again, some of these are not black and white. But if it's a new case, then and there's a medical opinion showing that it's a new case, then we have to follow what that opinion states. If it's an exposure that's triggering the recurrence, like the asthma that I mentioned, why did it recur? Is there some factor in that work environment that is triggering that? Maybe I'm assigned to a new location, new exposures in that area, and it causes me to have, an asthma attack. And one time you might go, is that cool? Is that just, something that happened? But if it's something that continues to happen because of that work environment, now that's going to be a new case, because let's say it's never happened before to that employee prior to being exposed to that aerosol or product that they may come in contact with. If signs and symptoms recur even in the absence of an exposure, it's not going to be a new case, because things like silicosis, tuberculosis, asbestosis, those are one-time diagnoses and they never go away. In other words, you never recover from those. But I may, have good days and bad days as I'm dealing with, one of these lung diseases, but it's not going to be a new case if it flares up. So we've determined that there's an injury or an illness, it's work related, and it's a new case. Now, does it meet the general criteria for recordability? So was it a fatality? Yes or no? Did it involve days away from work beyond the day of the injury? Did it require restricted work activity beyond the day of the injury? Did the medical require that person to do something different to avoid that exposure? So we're transferring them to another job, even though they're not missing time, they're being transferred to another job. That's essentially similar to restricted work days because they're grouped together on the 300 log. Did I get medical treatment beyond first aid? So instead of a steri strip or a bandage to close my finger slice, did I get a glue? Did I get stitches instead? If I got glue or stitches, those are seen as treatment beyond first aid, and so that would be a recordable injury. If there's a loss of consciousness and we don't know why, that's initially going to be a recordable criteria until we can determine the reason behind the loss of consciousness and we review the medical. There could be a personal medical condition that results in a person losing consciousness. And it may have nothing to do with the work-related activity that that person was doing. Until we know for sure, it's going to be recordable, and it's also reportable. So if we don't determine what it is within 24 hours, we have to let OSHA know that this person lost consciousness. And it's fine to say they were working at their desk, they were found unconscious. There doesn't appear to be any work-related reason for it, but you're making a report, they would more than likely not come out and do an inspection, but require you to provide some sort of follow-up within a certain time period. If there was a significant injury or illness diagnosed by a practicing licensed healthcare professional, then if time is away and prescriptions are involved, etc., then it's going to be one of those general recording criteria that's going to have to be documented on the 300 log. So here's a copy of the 300 log, and hopefully everybody got a handout with the 300 log and the calendar, the 2025 calendar, which we're going to use to go through 4 injury scenarios a little bit later, and then fill out our 300 log for days away and restricted days, etc. And then there's a supplemental question that says, is it reportable to OSHA? And we'll discuss those situations. All right, so we're going to record the case if it involves 1 or more days away from work. Again, not counting the day of the injury. So we have our log. It goes A, B, C, D, E, F. Those are the case number, optional. You can just number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Employee's name, job title, date of injury, of onset of illness or injury, where the event occurred. So that's the portion of the 3rd floor east end, room 21B or whatever it is that you may determine, and then describe the injury or illness. Now they don't give you a lot of room, but you could say fractured right index finger. So that says what the injury was and what body part, and that would be a sufficient description there. And then GHI&J, and that in this grayed out area over here where the heading is grayed out. Was it a fatality? That's this column here. G. Days away from work is H. Job transfer or other recordable injury. So in these boxes, it's either going to be a check mark, or some of the 300 logs, if you're using electronic format, it'll have like a radio button. You would just click in there and it would make a dot. So you're not putting any numbers in those 4 columns. But let's say I have an injury, it involves days away from work. What if that injury also involves 5 days away from work and then come back on restricted duty for 5 days? Do I click days away from work or job transfer or restriction? Even though it involves both, we generally only put in the more serious of the 2. So we're only going to click one of those, or put a mark in one of those 4 boxes. So if it involves days away from work, we're going to put a check mark in that days away from work. Now in these next 2 columns, we have the number of days away and the number of restricted days. So if I have 5 days away and 5 restricted days, I'm going to put 5 there and 5 there, even though it's for the same employee, because we're going to need to be totaling those at the end. So I did mention death, days away, restricted. If it's any other recordable type of injury that doesn't involve days away or restricted, but it's recordable because I got a prescription for a muscle relaxer, I'm going to click in that box J, and I'm going to have 0 and 0 for days away from work and restricted days. These last set of boxes here in section M There is, it'll just say injury. There's injury, and then there are a breakdown of different types of illnesses. So if I make an entry in here and it's an injury, even if it involves days away and restricted days, I'm still going to put a click in the injury column as well. Because what we want at the end of the day is for the total number of cases on the bottom of the page down here to total the total number of entries that we're making down here. So we'll see that as we do our exercise. I may be getting a little bit too ahead of myself. All right, any questions on that before I go to the next slide? We can type in, I should be able to read any questions that you have. Or if you have any questions as we go, just plug them in. It'll pop up on the screen and we can deal with it. All right, so we count the days away or restricted days. So we count the number of calendar days involved. So we've got the 2025 calendar. We're going to look at the day of the injury, and we don't count that day, but we're going to count every other day as if it's 5 days away from work, and it happens on a Friday, we're going to count Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So Friday it happened. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, they come back to work on Thursday. So that constitutes 5 days away. And then similarly for restriction. So let's see, we got a question here. Can I give a little more detail on the requirements for electronic submission? Yes, I will be doing that at the end. We're going to figure out how to do the 300 log and tabulate it, and then the electronic reporting for OSHA will come in once we have our 300 log secured for the calendar year. So right now we have until February 1st or February 2nd to post the paper 300 log in the workplace. And then we have until March 2nd to submit our electronic 300 log to OSHA if we have 20 or more employees in one of those industries that require electronic reporting. So I will cover that, Ron, as we get a little bit further in. For recordability, how we determine the number of days, as mentioned, if I'm missing 5 days, I'm going to count those 5 days. If the 5 days happen to be weekend days, those count as well. Cap the number of days at 180 days. I'm also going to cap the restriction at 180 days, which is 6 months, if it extends to that. But those are the maximums that we would put in for either of those activities. And I would say there may be some ADA issues for long-term restricted activity that we're accommodating. We could get into the realm of that's a permanent position that we're providing under those circumstances. So if we are creating a restricted task for someone, then it's really a transitional work hardening program as opposed to creating a permanent position that requires limited mobility or strength. So we need to just be careful of that. We may stop the day count if an employee leaves the company for a reason unrelated to the injury or illness. We covered that earlier. Or if a medical opinion exists, the employer must follow the medical opinion. So it's always important to get the medical, that you get a copy of something back from the clinic or the treating physician that says clearly they can be away from work, or that they're cleared to return to work, or that they're coming back to work on a restricted basis where they are limited to lifting 10 pounds or repeated bending. We need parameters to work from, and you need to follow the medical. If we're not getting return to work clearance and we're just going by what the worker says, we could be in jeopardy of putting somebody back to work before they're medically cleared to do so. The employee may want to come back to work, and that's great, but we don't want them to come back until they have medical opinion that says that they're cleared to work and in what capacity. If I have a restricted case, again, I'm going to record the number of days of restricted work activity or transfer, count starting the day following the injury. If they're not given any time off and they're just told to do, restricted duty for 10 days, and they can return to work the day after the injury in a limited capacity, then we start counting the day that they come back to work in that limited capacity as restricted workday case, as a restricted work days. And we're going to count those days. And then once they're cleared, then we put those total number of restricted days in column L on the sheet. Restricted work activity exists if the employee is unable to work the full day he or she would otherwise have been scheduled. So let's say they're allowed to do, say 75% of what they would normally perform, but they need to go for PT every day for 5 days. So they work a half a day, they go for PT. That's that's a restricted workday case in that sense, because they can't work a full day because they're going for some continued treatment, or they're unable to perform one or more of their routine job functions that they would normally do, prior to the injury. So maybe maybe they can only go in the office or take inventory in the warehouse, or inspect the vehicles for whatever inventory they're carrying before they go out to a job site, but they're not working as a plumber anymore, or they're not, an electrician, because they can't do that physical work. So those are going to be restricted workday cases, even though they're getting paid to work and they're not getting workers' comp. And I'm just going to say, if we have restricted work available, even if we're not sure that we do, you want to consider bringing your person back once they're medically cleared to do something, because every day that they're getting workers' comp is severity or dollars that are going to participate in the calculation of your experience mod, which now affects the rate that you pay per $100 of payroll for all your employees. So you want to realize that there is an off, if there's an offset here, you want to look at that. What's going to be better for the company in the long run? Leave them off completely, have all of that days away, and dollars being paid in medical and compensable time be calculated into your experience mod. It may push your mod up higher, which now impacts your entire payroll. So think about that. So restricted work. A case is not recordable under this standard if the restricted work case, as a restricted work case, if a healthcare professional determines that the employee is fully able to perform all of his or her routine job functions, and the employer assigns work restriction to that employee for the purpose of preventing a more serious condition from developing. So this is an interesting case. So if I have a sore shoulder, I go to the clinic and they say, yes, you have a sore shoulder, try and take it easy, but you'd really, your injury is not severe enough to be put out of work or require any time off. Now the employer gets the person back and they think, if I put them back doing the exact same thing, that sore shoulder may get worse to the point where they're now going to be off. So proactively, I'm saying, let's reassign this person somewhere where they get a few extra days recovery, and it's not going to be because they didn't miss any time, and let's say they didn't get any prescriptions, they just got medical examination, and they're not getting, and the employer is self-imposing that work restriction. It's not going to be a recordable case under those circumstances. Again, these are things that you have the ability to work with in some limited capacity with your employees, all working under the legal parameters of what you can do with your medical professional. Um, so for medical treatment, uh, if I go to the clinic, hospital, whatever the case may be, solely for observation or counseling, that that's not going to be a recordable in and of itself. If I go for a diagnostic procedure or I have treatment that is determined to be first aid, these are not going to be recordable medical treatments in that sense. All work-related cases involving loss of consciousness will need to be recorded. But you can always amend your 300 log once you get medical to support the reason behind the consciousness. If it's not determined to be work-related, then it's not, then you can take it off the 300 log. But if someone does lose consciousness in the workplace, you still have 24 hours to report it to OSHA. And you're not a medical professional to be able to make that determination that the person had fainted because maybe their medical condition determines that, they fainted because they didn't get medication or they didn't take something. Uh, so let's see the question. So self-imposed restriction would not be recordable if medically cleared, but self-imposed time off out of precaution be recordable as a lost time. Correct? Yes, that's correct. So if you're the employer and you said, look, take a few days off, I'm going to pay you anyway. That's time away from work. Um, you know, I I'm going to just take that back a bit. It's not black and white on that answer. So I guess we'd have to look at it more closely. If the worker wanted those days off, or they're going to take them as vacation days, and they have medical clearance to return to work, but you say, look, take a couple extra days rest. I think I'm going to retract what I said. It may not be recordable in that circumstance, because my bottom line is always, what does the medical say? Follow the medical. If the medical clears that person to return to work, then and they don't miss any time and their injury is not recordable as it is or reportable, then it may just end up being a first aid. Or even if it's recordable, because they got a prescription that doesn't preclude them from coming to work the next day, but you say take a couple days off anyway, then and your medical clears that person to return to work full duty, etc., then I think I would stand behind the medical as my reason for documenting the entry as no days away. Hopefully that clarifies that. So the following work-related conditions must always be recorded at the time of the diagnosis by the practicing licensed healthcare professional. All right. Oops. So if I have a chronic irreversible disease, and let's say I'm a Mason, and and the silica standard came into effect in 2017, but for 30 years prior to that standard, there was no requirement to protect me from inhaling masonry dust. And at some point, I develop a lung disease. So if I'm diagnosed with a chronic irreversible disease and it appears to be silicosis, and I've been a Mason for 30 years, that's probably going to be a work-related condition, and it's going to be recorded at the time. And it's not one of those things that's going to ever be corrected. So punctured eardrum is also going to be something that's recorded at the time. Further investigation would determine whether it's work-related or not. Fractured or cracked bone or tooth. That would be if it's work-related and it's determined by the diagnosis that it's work-related. I fell and landed on put my hand out to stop my fall. I fractured my wrist. That's going to be a recordable at that point. Bloodborne pathogens. This one, it applies more specifically to certain types of injuries for automatic recording. Not so much in construction, but it can. Needle stick injuries are not a large. Let's see this question. what happens if the Mason is working with an employer that has all controls in place? So if and was exposed by a previous employer, that, oops, that is, I think, going to fall into the category of the last employer of record. So if I've been a Mason for 30 years and I've worked for 10 different masonry contractors, and this year I'm diagnosed, even though I'm wearing a respirator now or doing table one wet or HEPA-vac control of the dust, but it finally has progressed to a point where my breathing is impacted and I'm diagnosed with silicosis. uh, I believe it falls to the employer of record. Now, there may be some legal maneuvers within the claims parameters that would allow you to go back. I'm not certain on that, but usually from a recordability standpoint, it's going to fall to the current employer. From a compensability standpoint, I'd have to ask a claims specialist for more specific details on that. Going back to the bloodborne pathogens. So if you're in a medical environment, you're more likely to encounter needle stick type injuries, housekeeping, changing bedding, things like that, where you may be impacted by a needle stick. Now, there are needle users for illegal drugs that happen in the workplace. There are needles that are used for diabetes and other reasons, also being used in the workplace. And if those needles are not disposed of into a biomedical container or a needle stick container, then someone's grabs, puts their hand somewhere, they don't realize it, there's a needle there, they get punctured. That is something that would need to be recorded. And unfortunately, any potentially infectious material or disease that occurs is going to take 4 to 6 months or something to manifest. And so you want to keep that on the record as a record only. And if nothing happens, nothing happens. It's no harm, no foul, I guess. But it should count as a recordable in that circumstance. Medical removal. Now this goes back, Ron, to in a way your question, because if we have an employee that has well, there's a couple of ways for medical removal, and the standard is very specific. The asbestos regulation has a medical removal requirement. Silica has a medical removal requirement. Lead has a medical removal requirement, and there are wider parameters for medical evaluation on a 3-year frequency, where you get an in-depth chest x-ray, you get other tests done to determine if you've got any overexposures to the product that you may be working with. And then lead specifically, bridge workers, sandblasters, things like that, workers like that are getting tested every couple of months for their blood lead levels. And if they are not using their PPE appropriately, and they do get excess lead in their blood, then there's going to be a medical removal where they are taken away from that exposure and treated medically. And those days away are going to be recordable days, et cetera, unless you can reassign that person to do something else, and the doctor allows that. Silica has a medical removal component to it as well. And there are every 3-year requirements for if you wear a respirator more than 30 days a year, then you're required to have this more in-depth medical evaluation, and to look for any, and they compare your first chest x-ray and pulmonary function test to the one 3 years next and 3 years down the road, et cetera. And as long as your PPE is being used and it's effective in practice, then your condition should not worsen. But if it gets to a point where you need to be removed from that exposure, then that's going to count as a medical removal from the workplace. Hearing loss is also another one of those last employer of record scenarios. But if there is a hearing loss diagnosis, and it falls under these parameters here where there's something called the standard threshold shift. So that they measure in different hertz levels, 2000, 3000, and 4000 hertz when they're doing their test. If there's been a change, 25 decibel hearing or more above those in those different ranges, and you're not hearing adequately, then they may say that you have a certain percentage hearing loss, and it could be compensable at that point. Again, it's going to be a claims issue, but if you're diagnosed with hearing loss, then it's going to be a recordable if it meets this threshold. So we have the OSHA 300 log, which was part of your packet. The 300A log is something that we have to use on an annual basis for reporting our annual tallies. And then the 301 is the first aid log, essentially. We record on a 301. Potentially, that injury could turn into a recordable. So we want to keep records at the time of the injury. Just a point on that. If you have a foreman or a supervisor or a lead hand or someone who's been deemed in charge of a crew, and a worker in that crew says to their supervisor, I think I hurt my back, shoulder, leg, whatever the case may be, but I'm okay. I'm going to, keep working. That worker has fulfilled their obligation under OSHA to report their injury to their supervisor. That supervisor probably doesn't know, but as far as the law in New York State goes, that supervisor is the company. So you want to make sure within your organization that if somebody reports something to your lead hand, your foreman, superintendent, that they have to now let someone at the office know that this person said this because they hurt their shoulder doing this. And that should be documented on that 301 form, and ask more questions, investigate what, where, why, how, all of that stuff, when, time, location, etc. Because say the foreman doesn't do anything, and 2 weeks later, that worker has continued to do it. Nobody's followed up to say, how you doing? You're still doing that work. Does it still hurt? Are you okay? And they get to a point where they can't work anymore. And now they go and see a doctor and are going to be put out of work because now that injury has gotten worse. So all of that could have been could have been prevented. And the company should have known, because the supervisor was told by this worker that they hurt themselves, but yet there's no record of it. And they could say, well, look, I told you 2 weeks ago that it happened. And now all of a sudden, the company's thinking, wow, that kind of sounds fishy, because, 2 weeks later, you're claiming an injury. It's very important to instill in your supervisors on the site that if somebody reports that to them, that you want to investigate that and document that, and then follow up to make sure that they're not getting worse while they're on the job. All right, so here's the 300 form. You all have one similar to this in your packet. Again, the first, all the lined sections, those are where we plug in our information, date, etc. And then the grade section, just to the right of center, is going to tabulate, the fatality, the days away, restricted days, or other recordable. And we're only going to put a mark in one of those boxes per line: number of days away, number of restricted days. And then if it's not an illness, a skin disease or hearing loss or respiratory injury or poisoning, any one of those other categories, then we're going to also, if we check days away from work on line 1, we have 3 days away from work. Then we're also going to check in M1, injury. We're going to check that box. So that at the bottom is going to tally so far 1 injury, 1 injury. So those G, H, I, and J totals are going to equal the M column totals. Here's the 301 form, which is basically the first aid report. So it's going to ask, who, what, where, when, why, how, and you want to document all of that. And as I said, if you're using a C2 report for report onlys, that will be sufficient. But if you're not using a C2 form, then this will suffice. Especially if you're not doing anything at this point with the reporting to your insurance company. And here's the 300A. So all of the information on here is a tally of each of the columns on the 300 log. So the 300A, the first column, it says total number of fatalities. So it's going to ask for total numbers of G, H, I, and J, total number of cases with days away, restricted days, other recordables, total number of days away. So that's where you count the calendar days, total number of restricted days, also calendar days. And then the M series all go in here. If it's just injuries, then we're going to have whatever that total number is. Then over here we have our establishment information. So before we forget, put the year in. So for this training purpose, we're doing it for calendar year 2025. Your establishment. So if you have an office and employees in one city, we'll call it Buffalo for argument's sake, and you only have one location, that's your establishment. We don't create establishments for every job that you go on because everybody works out of the main office. You're going to go 2 guys here, 3 guys there. If you have, you're a larger contractor and you have an office in Buffalo, in Rochester, in Syracuse, in Albany, then you're going to have 4 establishments and you're going to keep track of injuries and man hours separately for each of those establishments. So you may need 4 OSHA 300 logs and 4 OSHA 300A logs when it comes to doing a summary. Now, each establishment requires a 300 series of logs if you have more than 10 employees on an annual basis. So if you have 25 people in Buffalo, but you only have 6 in Rochester and 3 in Syracuse, you don't need those. You don't need an OSHA log in those circumstances. What I would, personally, what I would do is want to capture those man hours, however, because those man hours are going to help you when it comes to calculating your total case incident rates, etc. Now, you don't do that typically for OSHA specifically, but you may need it for bidding work, etc. And I don't want to go too deep into that. If you have questions on that, we can talk about that later. So we're going to put in, we're going to put our establishment name in, XYZ Company, Buffalo office, XYZ Company, Syracuse office, if we have more than one establishment, street, city, zip, etc. And then we're going to put in the industry description, the SIC code or the NAICS code. So if you're not sure what those are, there is you can punch those codes in. If you're a masonry contractor, you're a general contractor, there's all these different codes that can go in there that categorize you, and OSHA uses that to create statistics for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And if you're not sure what your NAICS code is, I can help you with that. Then we're going to add in the annual average number of employees. So that number goes on that line, and then total hours worked by all employees last year. So you're going to put in all the worked hours. Overtime hours are counted as single hours, regardless of how they're paid. And then the 300A log is going to be signed off by a signing officer at the highest authority at that establishment. So theoretically, it should be the president that signs that off. And you are verifying that these numbers are true and accurate. And we're going to post that because this now becomes, it's a legal requirement. So you want to have, to be as honest and report these numbers as fact. So that's the 300A log. And again, that needs to be posted at your establishment, someplace where employees can see it. If you have more than 10 employees, it should be posted, say in the lunchroom or some common area. You don't have to post these on every job site. If you have, we'll get to that in a minute, but if you have more than 20 employees, then we have an electronic 300A that we're going to submit to OSHA. All right, so employees must enter each recordable case on the forms within 7 calendar days of receiving that information. So here we have our 300 log. Joe Smith gets hurt on June 15th. And so he's been authorized off work. At this point, we don't know how long he's been off, but let's say he's got a fractured right hand. And he's in a cast. So we know that, fracture is going to be multiple weeks. So we might say 6 weeks. So we're going to calculate 42 days and put that in within the first 7 days. We're going to say, okay, he's probably not going to come back within 6 weeks. So we'll put that in. And then we'll reevaluate. Well, maybe he gets the cast off and then he's going to be on restricted days. Okay, so then we're going to put in, 42 or 45 days, whatever it turns out to be as the number of days away. And now they're going to be working with therapy to find out how many days they're going to be on restricted duty. Maybe they can come back on a restricted capacity, not doing, not lifting so much with that hand or whatever for another 14 days. And then before they get cleared, so that, we're amending our form as we go. Let me just see, it looks like I may have another question. Do you include hours worked by temporary employees through a temp service and subcontractor hours worked? So we don't count those hours. Subcontractor hours, definitely not. Temp service employees, we don't count their hours. But we would count their injury if it happened while we were supervising them. The exception is if you hire a temp agency crew and they come with their own supervisor, that's like having a subcontractor, and anything that happens with them is not going to impact your 300 or 300A because they have a supervisor. If you're supervising them, and they had an injury, we would count them as a recordable injury on our log, but we're not going to count their hours because they're getting paid elsewhere. So it's kind of a screwy scenario there, but interesting question. Do you also include injuries of employees through a temp service? Yeah, the injuries, yes, we covered for sure. Yeah. Okay. So we amend as we go with the days away. And sometimes we just have to make a guess. What you don't want to do, because we don't know when they're coming back, is to leave that thing blank. Let's say OSHA shows up on site and they ask for your 300 log. We may have a few hours to produce the 300 log from the office because it doesn't have to be maintained on site. So we transmit the 300 log by email to the site, and the compliance officer looks at it and sees that there was an injury 3 weeks ago. We have the date, the name, what happened, but we have no data entered in the, whether it's days away, transfer, or other recordable, and how many days. We have nothing there. Potentially, that's a citation because we're not maintaining it within 7 days. Whether they do that or not, I don't know, but technically it would be in violation. So try and estimate ahead, and you can always amend uh, after that. Sometimes it's safer just to put the entry in, put 180 days on there. Now legally you're protected. If the person comes back in 30 days, you go back and amend that log. And that's a nice thing if you're using the Excel spreadsheet 300 log. You can just go in, pull it up on the form, make the amendment, and you're done. And it has the formulas built in, so it'll keep tallies on the numbers of injuries, the days away, the restricted days, et cetera. It automatically tallies at the bottom. And at the end of the year, it also populates your 300A for those totals. So it's a really good form to use in that sense. All right, you can use an equivalent form. I don't know why you would want to make your own, but if you do, that's allowable under the standard. So there's a provision for privacy cases. There are some injuries which can be to a sensitive part of the body, or they're sensitive in nature generally. And these 300 logs, while we have a note on the top of the log that says this form contains information relating to employee health and must be used in a manner that protects the confidentiality of employees to the extent possible while the information is being used for occupational safety and health purposes. Having said that, it's not HIPAA protected. So a worker or a representative for the worker can ask to see the 300 log, and legally they have that right to ask. And so if there's information on the log that may be not related to the question that this whoever's asking for it may have, but is going to be sensitive to the employee that may have had an injury that they don't want spelled out in black and white on the report, we would make an entry as a privacy case number one. We don't put the person's name in or what they do. We would put the date in and all these other things, where the entry or where the event occurred and description. We would just put privacy case number one. We still would have to record days away, etc., because they don't give away the identity. But now what that does when we enter that as a privacy case, it takes it out of this 300 log, which is not HIPAA protected, into a personnel file in the HR world and in the claims world, which is HIPAA protected. And so we're going to keep those files separately. So a privacy case, an injury or illness to an intimate part of the body or reproductive system, an injury or illness resulting from sexual assault, mental illness, HIV infection, hepatitis, tuberculosis, a needle stick and sharp that are contaminated with another person's blood or potentially infectious material, or an employee voluntarily requests to keep their name off for other illness cases. Most of the time, the employees don't know enough to request that there not be entered, that there's a privacy protection requirement. That's really up to us as the employers to say, I should probably not just spell that out there for anybody to see, make it as a privacy case, and then use HIPAA to protect that worker. The employee may use discretion in describing the case. There are going to be some authorized people that could have access to it. An insurance auditor or consultant may want records. Again, sometimes you may want a subpoena to be required, and that's a normal procedure in some cases. Your workers' comp or other insurance, that should be available to them. Again, that's all going to be protected under that HIPAA umbrella. Or public health authority or law enforcement, again, it's going to be protected information, especially if there's a criminal complaint as a result of a sexual contact in the workplace. They're going to need to know the facts, and again, it's all going to be protected information in that case. Multiple business establishments, I think I kind of covered that a little bit. There are some circumstances where a specialty contractor is doing work at an industrial facility where they have like a permanent maintenance contract. and they're going, and those, 10 or 11 employees go to, an automotive plant or another industrial facility where they're reporting there all the time. That in this case, would be considered a separate establishment because they're going there all the time. We would have to carve out those man hours and those injuries separately for that establishment. Um, and again, that would apply if we had multiple establishments. If you think of, a national contractor like, Turner or Gilbane or Skanska or some of these, not only national but multinational companies under the U.S. OSHA standards, under the law here in the U.S., every one of their locations, offices, in the different cities that they operate in would all be required to have their own OSHA 300 log for those employees reporting out of that location if they exceeded 10 employees at that location. I guess look at how your operation works. If you have that potential and you have some additional questions, again, we can talk about that offline and look at those, what we need to do there. So covered employees, again, for numbers of employees, these are all employees on the payroll. Employees not on the payroll who are supervised on a day-to-day basis are ready labor temporaries. So they would be not constituted employees as far as the numbers go, but as recordables if it were. Exclude self-employed and partners in an LLC or a corporation. And temp agencies should not record the cases experienced by the temp workers who are supervised by the using employer. So if I hire 3 laborers to do cleanup for 4 days on my job site, one of them gets hurt, they go on my log because I'm supervising them. The temp agency does not record them as an injury on their log. So yeah, I don't want to go into variations on that, but that's how that works. So the annual summary is the 300 log. You're going to complete the form 300. The signing officer at that location with the highest authority is going to certify that summary, and then we're going to post it in a location where employees can see it. So the officer in that corporation, highest ranking company official, must post for a 3-month period from February 1st to April 30th. So this February 1st to April 30th of this year, you have to post your 300A log in a location where employees can see it. After April 30th, you can take it down. You still have to be able to produce that if OSHA requires it. You still have to be able to produce your previous year's OSHA 300 log for a period of 6 months. So end of April, so May, June, July. So at the end of 6 months would be the end of July because the posting is supposed to go up February 1st. So if OSHA asks for the 300 log beyond the end of July, and you say, yeah, I got it, but I'm not going to give it to you, they can't do anything about it. They used to say you have to keep it for 5 years and you could be cited for 5 years. But there was a case, this Volks Construction fought that and they won because the law says OSHA does not have jurisdiction beyond 6 months from whatever the offense is. So even though the standard still says retain the form for 5 years, most people do anyway, but you can't be penalized for not producing it once you go 6 months beyond the first day of that posting. And you need not update the OSHA 300A form or the 301 form. So let's say you have a 300 log and something changes with the data that you have beyond the February 1st. We project a return to work or the amount of days that someone's going to be off, and that changes, but it doesn't change until after February 1st, and we've already made our tally for, in this case, 2025. We can amend that 300 log for our purposes, especially if OSHA asked for it, and especially if it is in our favor where the person comes back to work sooner. We're not required by law to amend the 300A log and then have to repost it for any length of time. If you want to amend it, that's not a bad idea, especially if you have been requested on a regular basis, where a general contractor requests your 300 and 300A logs, or your for to include in a bid, because they're going to want to look at it. So you always want to have your 300 log reflect the best picture of yourself as possible. You only want to you only want to record what's required to be recorded. And as an aside, on the protection of the employees' names that are on the list, if a GC asks for 3 years worth of 300 logs, you are within your rights to redact the names of the people that are on that list. But the date and the type of injury you're not giving anything away to the GC, and then all of the data, did they miss time, how many days, etc. But the names, fair play to redact those. One of the things that we have to do, and that's probably a good idea at a new hire or an annual refresher training, is to make sure your employees know how to report an injury. And as mentioned, make sure your supervisors know that if someone reports an injury to them, that they report it to the office, and that you make a determination on how it should be handled, and whether they get medical and get something on paper, or at least investigate it and take it from there. If an employee requests information on the 300 log 301, we do have a requirement to provide that for them. I've not heard of a case ever where an employee has asked for information on the 300 log. I think it would be more likely to happen in an industrial setting, more so than construction, but that's just my opinion. So this section here has recently been added, the prohibition against discrimination. So the section 11C of the Occupational Safety and Health Act prohibits you from discriminating against an employee for reporting a work-related fatality, injury, or illness. And it also protects the employee who files a safety and health complaint if they ask for access or otherwise exercise their rights afforded by the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So we can't retaliate against these workers. The first one, though, discriminating against safety employee for reporting a work-related fatality. This one has been expanded in practical purposes to include incentive programs that involve accident-free workdays. Because if you are giving out prizes or pizza party at the end of the month or something, if you go a month without having a work-related injury, now in a sense what you're doing is putting pressure on an employee who may have an injury but is afraid to report it, because they're going to spoil the party for everybody. And there have been acts of retaliation against that employee by other employees because they messed it up for the bigger group. And so incentive programs are fine as long as they're not based on accidents and not having accidents, because in a sense, as I said, it discriminates against that employee for wanting to report or reporting that work-related injury. All right, so we have to report the fatality, and this is old wording. They haven't changed it, but they don't have such a thing as a catastrophe anymore. It used to be 3 workers hospitalized for the same accident. They still call it fatality and catastrophe reporting, but it really pertains only to fatalities. There's all these other avenues for where accidents can be reported. But what we're required to do is, if there's a fatality on our workplace and we do not know why it occurred, but someone was found dead on the job site. And it's happened where fatality occurred in a porta-john. We had to report that as a fatality on the workplace. In that one case that I can think of, it happened to be an overdose, self-administered, and it wasn't determined to be a work-related fatality, but we don't know why. So 8 hours, we have to report it as a fatality regardless of why it occurred. That's a phone call to OSHA. If we have a work-related amputation, loss of an eye, or inpatient hospitalization of one or more employees, we have to report that to OSHA within 24 hours. If something happens on the highway, motor vehicle accident, something outside of, unless you're a construction worker working on the highway that's injured in your work zone or killed, then that's the workplace. So that would be required to be reported. But if somebody gets into a motor vehicle accident and they're killed in the vehicle, even though they're driving a work vehicle on work time, that's not going to be a call to OSHA to report that as a fatality. Same with, commercial travel. And someone dies in an accident, they're flying on a business trip and the plane crashes, that's not going to be a call to OSHA. So the amputation I want to go back to on this reporting. Amputation is going to be determined by what the medical says. So the medical may show the finger slice, or, even if it's the tip of the finger, it may show it as a laceration. It may show it as an amputation. We need to know what that medical says specifically about that, because there's been a letter of interpretation that says an amputation, it's a traumatic loss of limb or other external body part. That part we know, we can figure that out. But it includes fingertip amputation with or without bone loss. So that could be a very small tip of the finger, because the bone pretty much comes right to the top of the finger. But if there is an injury that the doctor considers an amputation, then and we don't notify OSHA of that medical diagnosis. The state actually, anything that they receive from a work comp form, those reports are all, scanned. If there's amputation flagged in that software reading of that automatically gets flagged, and it'll be sent to OSHA, for sure in New York. I don't know about other states. And OSHA will be notified at some point, a month down the road or 2 months down the road. So they're going to say, oh, we had this company had a fingertip amputation on June 12th. And they're going to go back through their call logs and go back to June 12th, and 24-hour period from then, and look to see if it was called in. And if it wasn't, I have been told directly by the area director in the Buffalo office that they will issue a desk citation. They'll just send out a citation because you didn't report it within 24 hours. Boom. Here you go. Issue a citation for not reporting. So again, I reiterate, get the medical back, analyze your medical, make sure you get something back that allows the worker to come back to work and you know exactly what the medical diagnosis is. All right. So if you have your workshop, there's 4 cases that we have. I'm gonna stop talking for 10 minutes or so. So it's we'll call it 10:30. So 10:40, I'll come back on. Look at these 4 cases. Each one says, do I need to notify OSHA? Yes or no. And then we don't have to put all the information on the 300 log, but I want you to use the calendar as well. Calculate the number of days away, the number of restricted days that apply, write those numbers down, and then we'll review the reasons why. All right, so I'll be back on in 10 minutes. I will answer questions if you have something you need clarified. as we go through. So you can type that in. All right, back on. Um, so hopefully you've had a chance to finish all four, but we'll go through them anyway. Um, so the first accident is Albert Cummings. He's a carpenter. January 10th, 2025, working at the Nova Charter School project, reported a right shoulder strain from repetitive motion at his lunch break. He reported it. Office directed him to a nearby walk-in clinic where he was treated and given a prescription for an anti-inflammatory. He filled the prescription at his local pharmacy on his way home. He was cleared to return to work full duty on Monday, January 13th. He returned to work without issue. So first question is, do I need to notify OSHA? Yes or no? Anybody? No, that's correct. And now, how many days away or no days what do we record in for our on our log? 2 days. Yeah, very good. So I got a bunch of answers. Let's see, 2 days away, 2 days away, and is it recordable? So if he came back to work on, let's say, if he wasn't given a prescription, yes, it is recordable. If he wasn't given a prescription and the company got medical that said he could return to work on Friday, then do we do anything? No, it would not be a recordable in that case. And no prescription. So there would be no issue with that one. But because he filled the prescription and Saturday and Sunday are days from the day of treatment and his authorization of return to work Monday, 2 days lost time. Okay, very good. This next one, a little bit different. So Mr. Watts is an electrician, high voltage electrical. Hang on, looks like a question. What happens if he didn't fill the prescription? Good question, but since it was issued, it's going to be on the medical. And so if we follow the medical, then it's still going to be a recordable in that sense. Even if he came back to work, if he was authorized to come back to work on that same day of the injury. All right, Mr. Watts is an electrician. He received an electrical shock from a 220 volt live wire, causing him to fall from his ladder to the floor. He fell 8 feet, landing on a cement floor. His hard hat came off. He struck his head. He lost consciousness. EMS was contacted. He was transported to hospital and admitted, treated for severe burns to his right hand and right foot, so entry and exit wound, as well as a concussion to the head. So on March 20th, he received a skin graft to his hand and his foot. He remained hospitalized until March 30th. While off, he received physical therapy until he was able to return to work on restricted duty on May 20th. On June 5th, he returned to work without restrictions. So a couple of things here. Does OSHA need to be notified and why? So we can do that in the same answer. Yes, because of loss of consciousness. Yes, also because he was admitted. So both of those cases, both of those reasons would definitely make it reportable to OSHA. All right, so then what do we have for days away and restricted days? $62 days away, correct. 16 restricted days, also correct. Excellent. Everybody get that? 62 and 16, yeah. All right, good, 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 good. All right, moving on to Dan Rooney. Mr. Rooney works as a drywall installer for Stuttle Drywall. On August 22nd, he was assigned to the renovation job. His new acoustic ceiling was being installed. He and his coworkers were installing new 4 feet by 9 foot drywall boards to the ceiling. He and a coworker were replacing the board, screwed it in place. He completed his workday and went home for the weekend. And Monday, he called in to report and called into work to say he was seeing a doctor for his upper back pain, which he felt was associated with his work on Friday, August 22nd. So on Monday, August 25th, he saw his doctor, was put out of work and placed on muscle relaxers for 10 days. He saw his doctor again on September 3rd and was released to work without restriction. All right. Do we need to call OSHA? No, and no, and no, and that's correct. And then what do we have for our entry on the log? How many days? So we have a 10 and an 11. Anybody else? um, let's see this one. How do we know it was work related? Well, uh, if the doctor concurs with the worker and the doctor has to believe the worker that it occurred on the Friday, and so he's going to treat accordingly. The way the state will look at it and say, is the work that the worker claims he was doing part of the regular course of work? Was he at work that day doing that work? And if those questions are yes and yes, then that claim will be deemed recordable. Sorry, I skipped ahead on. Uh, so uh, it's going to be recordable, but we still don't have the right number of days. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's see. I have 12 days. And so this is August. So it happened on the 22nd of August. So he didn't see a doctor until the 25th, but he's saying it happened on the 22nd. So we're going to count the 23rd and 24th. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 days, and then back to work on the 4th. So you follow me on that one? Okay, yeah. So we've got a couple. Doctor put him out for 10 days, but the first day was actually the day of the injury, which was the 22nd. So our Saturday and Sunday count because the doctor is agreeing. He didn't go to work on Monday, and he let's see, he didn't tell his supervisor anything on the Friday, and the company can always contest that, but at the moment, the doctor is saying yes. Do you have a complaint is showing pain there. The work that he did on Friday could have caused it. The state would probably accept it, and it's going to be a recordable 12-day case. How do I know he didn't return on 12/3? Because he saw his doctor again on September 3rd and was released to work without restriction. So fair enough. I guess I didn't say that specifically, but yeah, I guess I should have said specifically he returned to work on the 4th. So if in that case, I will say the 11 is okay if you've put that in because I wasn't as clear as I should have been. So if you have 11 or 12 days, you can consider yourself correct on that one. All right, so then let's look at Mr. Rothman. He's a millwork carpenter. November 26, 25, finishing a restoration project, using a table saw, cutting a piece of millwork. He lost his grip. His hand slipped. His right hand was injured by the blade, and he lost the tip of his right ring finger and most of his middle finger. They were completely amputated by the blade. His co-workers called EMS. They took him and his amputated fingers to the hospital for attempted reattachment. He was taken immediately into surgery. He did not return to work in construction again. So the question is, do we call OSHA, yes, Ron, thank you. It was an amputation and it is reportable. How many days do we put on our log? 180. That's it. He doesn't come back. Um, we don't know, what he does after that. Now, if I said that, 3 months in or 90 days in, he was rehabbed and went back to school to learn something else. Then what would we put in for our days away? If we knew he left employment for voluntary reasons, right? We would change it to whatever day we were aware of. So it was 90 days. We would only put in 90 days. We can go back and amend the 300 log, as long as that 90-day period, you know, um, didn't expire before we had to report our 300 electronically to OSHA, which is what I'm going to talk about next. All right. So, oh yeah, this is the thing I talked about with incentive programs. So I'm going to move from that. So the electronic reporting is a requirement that came into effect. I'm not sure how many years ago now, but it's been a while. And that requires the electronic reporting of the OSHA 300A log for all employees with 250 or more employees. And it needs to be reported annually by March 2nd. So in 2024, they added a list of high risk industries, and um, there's published appendices, and they were supposed to be reviewing these appendices on an annual basis, but they have not made any revisions. This is the third year now that they've been doing this. It started from the 2023 year that we had to report for 24. Then there was the 24 year and now the 25 year. So they've not made any changes to the appendices. But if you have more than 100 employees, there was a change. If this appendix kicked in for high risk industries, et cetera, those were required. But without going into all the parameters of what's on those appendices or not, if you have more than 20 employees and you're in construction, manufacturing, trucking, or some construction type activity, you are going to fall under the requirement to report electronically per establishment. So if you have more than one establishment with more than 20 employees, then you're going to have multiple establishments. But it's called the injury tracking application. It's accessible through the OSHA website. And you can manually enter the data from your 300 or 300A, or you can upload these other files if you know how to do that. There's a help desk if you need some information from OSHA as well, some guidance. But basically it looks like this. You're going to create an account. You're going to put in, this is now the user that's going to be putting in, creating the account for your company. And you want to make sure that more than one person knows who the user is, what the password is, etc., that we're using for reporting. So you're going to put in your first name, last name, company name, your job title, email, and confirm your email. And now we're going to create the account essentially for OSHA. So we're going to create an establishment. So let's say most employers have one establishment. You're going to put in your name, XYZ company. If you want to count, if you have more than one establishment, you might say XYZ company Buffalo. The next one, and then we'll go through this. And if you have a second one, you're going to go through and say establishment name is XYZ company Syracuse. And then you put in the company name, address, city, state, zip, NAICS code, number of employees, you're going to put in there. Then you're going to add in the data from your 300A log. So it's going to be the totals of each of the columns. So the number of fatalities, you'll see it over here in G. cases with days away from work. So if you have 5 cases with days away from work, you're going to put in 5. If you have 0, you put in 0. Cases with job transfer or restriction, how many of those did you have? It could be all zeros. Um, and that's, best case scenario. You're going to have the average number of employees and the total hours worked will go in those boxes. And then you're going to review all of that data. Look at the name, address, NAICS code. Um, you can edit if you've input something improperly. If everything is good, then you're going ahead and submit those 300A details. If you have a second establishment, then you're going to go create an establishment. This is a plus. So you're going to add on, and you may have, 5 or 6 establishments, or you may have only the one, but they're all going to be reported from that ITA account that you set up. And that's all there is to that. So if you've not done one and you're in that category and you want some assistance, again, we can work on you individually, work with you individually. And if there's any questions on that you might have on, is this recordable? Is it not recordable? Then we can also work with you to make that determination. But otherwise, I appreciate you staying tuned. It's been 2 hours. And again, thank you for participating. I'll stay on if there are any questions for the next few minutes.